Welcome to Inflection Points. Join hosts Carlo Guzzetti and Tim Harrison as we explore Extreme's vision of the infinite enterprise. We see a world where people have become infinitely distributed around the globe, which means businesses must work at scale and focus increasingly on becoming consumer-centric to connect with each and every one of them. Welcome back. We're back with Season 2 of Inflection Points. Season 2.
Let it begin.
It feels like it was just yesterday it was Season 1, but now it's Season 2.
It's Season 2. I'm so excited.
You're super excited, I know. In this season, we're going to be talking to entrepreneurs and business leaders about the future of technology in their industries. We're going to try and understand how they approach the future of technology.
I think that it's going to be a really interesting season because we're going to compare all of these technologies to our own North Star and vision here at Extreme Networks, which is the infinite enterprise. And
the infinite enterprise.
I mean, I think you've heard of it. I think we spent all last season on it.
We did.
But the infinite enterprise has three main tenets. And the first is infinite distribution. The second is at scale. And the third is customer centricity. And what we're saying with this and what those three tenets mean is that we're saying that the network has to be infinitely distributed. It has to be the same level of connectivity, quickness, no matter where you are, whether you're in San Francisco or you're in Idaho, it has to be the same kind of experience. And they will continue to distribute because society is continuing to distribute. And that's been because as a result of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've been on that journey for a while.
Right.
But the tipping point of that was when COVID came along and everybody had to up sticks and disappear from the centralized enterprise, if you will, and everybody had to be at home and for their own safety. So things have significantly changed and the approach to how we work and how we live has changed.
Well, everybody's heard the stories. I mean, everybody has heard about how, hey, you know, we don't have to be in San Francisco anymore. So there's a mass exodus of Californians to the rest of the country. I'm really sorry, surrounding states. I am one of those people. So everybody has really distributed themselves from around these centers. And then the second one is at scale, meaning that we have to be able to scale to the individual, but we also have to be able to scale to something the size of an enterprise. It has to be able to work for of any size of group of people at any type of level, right?
Yeah, that experience that you're used to in the enterprise office or the business local center, you have to be able to expect that experience or better from your home office or from your mobile device or from the top of a mountain where you have connectivity. You need to be able to have that experience wherever you are.
Right, and it has to be individualized, and that brings us into our third one, which everything has to be customer centric. And the importance with it being customer centric is that now if everybody is infinitely distributed and everybody is managing their own technology, it means that you have to have something that is going to be easy for any person with any kind of level of technological experience to be able to handle it and to be able to understand can they get the most from their network? What is the data that you're going to be seeing? And that means that my poor mom, is going to have to be able to troubleshoot her own network. I mean, we got her to work an iPhone. I believe we can make it happen. I believe in you, Mom.
I believe in you, Carla's mother.
So as we look at all three of these, this is what we consider every single day at Extreme Networks. We're going to align that and see how that goes and aligns to all of the entrepreneurs that we're going to have on for the season. Are these tenants also part of their North Star? How does what they're working on align to this as well? Is it infinitely distributed? Is it going to work at scale? Will it be hyper individualized? Is it going to be customer centric? Like, these are the things that I'm really excited to see. We're kind of testing the road of our own vision. Do others agree with us?
That's right. Yeah, we definitely want to know if they agree. We want to figure out whether they're trying to change the world. Are they trying to address immediate problems? You know, how does this concept fit with their view of the technology world and the social structure of business? You know, it's a big part of the conversation is how has the social structure changed?
Yeah. A lot to consider there. What's also exciting about this is we're taking a lot of trending topics from the media and we're seeing it how it goes. I mean, Tim, let's just say the word metaverse.
Oh, here it is. Metaverse. Yep. We had to say it at some point, didn't we?
We did.
So, I mean, that's an interesting point. You know, there are so many things that are happening in the technology world today, but the metaverse has been sort of a major focus recently. As you know, certain companies are looking to try and find a way to take this another step further into virtual worlds and to be able to sort of fix some of the problems we've run into with our current medium of communication here as we talk over our video conference application, not naming any names, but those applications have become vital for our experience in the workplace. And what can we do beyond that? What is the meta version of that, if you will?
Exactly. And how do we make it work so that it can be distributed, so that it is more customer centric, so that we can get the most out of it and have a more fulfilling experience than just the not to be mentioned current application we're working on.
Well, we have an amazing guest who has such a vision of how to change the world. We want to introduce you to Victor Ripperbelli. He is the co-founder and CEO of Synthesia Incorporated. And he is probably the first stab at the metaverse that we've seen thus far, in that his business creates avatars. I mean, wouldn't you think those are the first things you would need in a metaverse, right? You have to represent yourself somehow.
I suppose, and I am dating myself because somebody still says avatar to me. I still think blue, but we're not talking about those avatars. And not if you're going to have an avatar in the future, you don't have to be blue. I've confirmed.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. So Victor's avatars, they have the ability to deliver, with just a tiny little bit of work, communications that talk like you. Okay. So the ability to have an avatar of a Carla who speaks like Carla, I think is pretty exciting, actually.
I don't think the world needs more than one of me. I think that's a safe assumption. And I'm not sure we need another Tim either, but...
Oh, that's harsh.
Harsh, but fair.
I accept that. In reality, his goal, his vision of the future is that everyone should be able to create and direct Hollywood movies from their laptop, which is kind of interesting. I mean, think about that. Like the ability to be able to story tell without having all this production crew and cameras and lights and whatever. You could do that digitally. I mean, that's kind of exciting. There's a democratization of the ability to create that storytelling content. That's really fascinating.
That was the foundation of the internet, right? The democratization of knowledge, being able to share knowledge. It should be available to everyone. I think this is the next step of that. And it's really interesting what Victor has to say about it. And frankly, also what we focus on is the democratization of networking as well. How do you make technology easy for everybody to consume? So that really does align with some of the tenets that we ourselves are looking at here, which is pretty cool. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like Francis Ford Coppola might have something to say about making Hollywood movies in someone's office or bedroom. But you never know. And I'm really excited to talk to Victor about it because he has made the top there. So there are all these lists all over the world about top entrepreneurs, but he has made the list of top entrepreneurs under 30.
I know.
I am an underachiever.
I know how you feel.
I mean, he is all over the place. You heard it here first on Inflection Points, but he's been on 60 Minutes, and every quarter or so he's making another multi-million-dollar investment. So not only am I interested to learn about how I'm going to become a Hollywood director, but I also need him to tell me, how do you get people to give you millions of dollars? Because I need more millions of dollars. Better yet, how can I get an avatar to give me millions of dollars?
Well, therein lies the key, right? Is the ability to have somebody else do it on your behalf. Yeah, his UK-based company has announced a whole bunch of investments, a $12 million investment recently, and now he's just announcing another $50 million investment. So obviously people have faith in what it is that he's saying and what he's offering. So I think we should go have a conversation with this particular guy.
I agree. Let's go do it.
Victor, can you explain what your vision is for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks a lot for having me. So At its core, what we do at Synthesia is we help our customers make awesome video content without the need for cameras, studios, actors, microphones, complicated post-production, all those things that you usually would associate with video. The way we do that is using artificial intelligence. So as with a normal video, right, you would use a camera, which is in essence a physical sensor that you record something that happens in the real world with. We have built a system that can synthesize video entirely via software, right? So that means the video production process is now no longer a physical process, it's a digital process. And that means that if you use our platform, you simply just go into synthesia.io, you select an avatar on our web platform, which can be one of our off-the-shelf avatars, or it could be yourself. And then you actually just type in kind of like the manuscript for your video. You hit generate, and then our AI algorithms will essentially create a talking head style video with whatever script that you put in. It works in 55 different languages, and there's also kind of video editing functionality around that. So that's kind of really at its core what we do. And I'd say maybe just to touch a quick kind of paragraph on what people are using it for. The big thing we're seeing, right, is that video and audio is becoming the default for almost everything that we do online, especially in our private lives, but we're also bringing that preference with us to the workplace, right? And that's driving a surge in demand in the enterprise for video and audio content, especially scalable ways of creating that. And we offer that. And what we're seeing our customers do is actually, at least at this stage, less about replacing video production. It's not like people are throwing out their cameras. What they're doing is they're replacing text, right? They're taking assets which used to be a PDF or a slide deck or a help center article, something like that, and they can create video out of that. So that's kind of at its core, like what we do and the problem we solve for our customers.
So where do you see, I mean, you've given us some examples of immediate applications, but where do you see it evolving, particularly as it's become more and more important to be able to communicate through digital and audio, particularly in the wake of the pandemic? Where have you really seen an uptick in the usage of your application that you haven't seen before? Where are some places that might have surprised you? You would have gone, I hadn't expected that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of wow, we hadn't expected that, but we see our customers building content around it, which I think is fantastic. I would say the key thing we've seen over the last 14 months really is a lot about the knowledge that sits inside of especially very large organizations is usually kept and stored as text, right? And text is just not a great way of communicating with people in 2021. So what we've seen, what a lot of companies do, right, is take a lot of this kind of internal information, which could be anything from trainings, and that could be like very kind of practical. This is how you do XYZ. If you're a big fast food chain, for example, like how do you change the oil in a deep fryer, to more kind of compliance type of things, or how to deal with COVID-19 in your job, for example. And then they are turning this into video content, right? And often in many different languages. So that's a lot of what we've seen, kind of internal communication inside organizations. But we've also seen quite a bit of our customers using it to communicate with external kind of stakeholders. So that could be customers, for example, or partners. And maybe just a fun kind of anecdotal example is we work with a very large consultancy company, and they, in the middle of the pandemic, obviously could not have as many physical, they could have no physical meetings, basically, right? And what happened was they had a lot of Zoom meetings, like we're all having all the time. And they started recording these Zoom meetings, and then they would send the recording to the client afterwards. And this would often be, like an hour-long Zoom call, for example. And then the idea was you can kind of forward this Zoom recording around to your colleagues and use it as, if you want to go back and kind of re-experience that meeting. It turns out that asking someone else to watch someone else's Zoom meeting is literally like the definition of torture for most people. Nobody wants to watch an hour of someone else's Zoom meeting with all the Zoom tango going on at the beginning, people forgetting to unmute themselves, all that fun. So what they found instead was that they could create Synthesia videos with their avatars, which would often be just a few kind of minutes long. When they had to type it out, they would be way more concise than if they were to do it verbally or record themselves. And then you can create these kind of small videos that can easily be sent around to their customers inside the organizations. I think that's like a fun little example of how people are using it. And I think it's also a great example of how this is less about replacing something that already exists and more about enabling people to do something kind of entirely new, right? which is something that I'm personally just, really fascinated by and really excites me a lot.
That's really interesting. You've mentioned translation in multiple languages, but what you just said as an example also has an element of translation in it, going from sort of long-form conversation to something more concise and then translating that text into video content. Can you walk me through a little bit, obviously, the value of the translation? It sounds like this is instant translation, right? So you create an avatar, you put the text in, the translation is done instantaneously for these 55 languages. I mean, that's incredible opportunities for a company to reach a global audience. And the other is the ability to translate that sort of long form, like I'm doing right now, blather into something that is very concise and easy to consume. Do you see this as a translation mechanism overall?
Yeah, I think as humans, obviously, gone through many different modes of communication, and right now, digital text is probably kind of the primary way of communication for most people, right? And one way I think about this, right, is like if you, for example, go back to the first newspapers in like the 1600s, something like that, that was basically a wall of text, right? There was no images, there was definitely no videos, there was no graphics. And that's not because people didn't want to read newspapers that had images or graphics in them, right? It was simply, there's a constraint, right? You couldn't print those things. We had no idea how to do that. We just figured out how to print words on a piece of paper. One thing that has held true for the last 400 years is that we're constantly going towards more rich and more interactive forms of communicating with each other, right? And less kind of static text newspaper style format. And of course, if you look at a newspaper today, most people read it online. It'll have videos, it'll have images, it'll have interactive charts. The way I think of this is really just like we're in this kind of interesting phase where for the first time, video creation and audio creation can actually be as easy and as scalable as text, right? Which is a first in history. Mm-hmm. If you think about like how much content we all create every day in text, it's a lot, right? It maybe seems kind of obvious now that we're all typing all the time, but if you go 40, 50 years back in time, most people's job was not to produce text content, right? That was something that someone in the company would be tasked with doing. Someone would be like, writing the documents, sending it to a secretary who would then make copies of it. Like that's not that long ago, right? But now it's kind of part of everyone's job to write text. Like we do LinkedIn updates, we do all this type of stuff, right? And I think we're slowly moving towards a world in which a bigger percentage of the content we create is not text, like emails, right, or LinkedIn updates. It's moving more towards, of course, live communication, like we're doing right now with Zoom, which has now become normal, but also that we all produce more kind of visual and interactive content.
I completely agree. I find myself personally, I hate email. So I prefer if you really have to write an email that's longer than a paragraph, then perhaps you should just give me a call. That would be easier. But Victor, you kind of teed us up for where my brain was going already, which is we've talked about some of the current applications and some of the use cases that we're seeing right now, but take us into the future. So 50 years ago, we weren't producing all of this text, but let's say, where are we going to be 50 years from now? If we're all creating, instead of texting each other, we're creating avatar audio and video and sending that out. What is life like?
So 50 years from now is obviously a long time in this especially exponential age. So that's almost hard to reason about. But I can maybe give you a few kind of timelines leading up to that. So I think right now, the kind of field we operate in is generally called synthetic media as a kind of category, right? We're in the super early stages of it. It's been something that researchers have been working on for quite a while. We founded the company in 2017 on the back of my two professor co-founders' academic work for almost 10 years. And we're now getting to the point where these technologies, and I'd say we probably got there like a year ago-ish, 1.5 years ago. But these technologies went from being, okay, they're pretty cool, it's pretty awesome, this will one day be something that's going to be usable for something, to, okay, now it's actually usable for something, right? The kind of way that our customers use it is very specific, right? No one is building emotional storytelling on Synthesia yet, because the videos are not at that level yet, right? They will be one day, but it's, of course, kind of a sequencing act. For us, like, the next 5 years really is about taking kind of what I'd call business communication in video and audio, making that accessible, making that something you can just do in the browser. You can code up these interactive, personalized video experiences if you're a developer, which I think is going to be an entirely new type of user experience you can actually create online. And we want to essentially enable anyone who today is using Microsoft Office style products to produce content that's 10 times as engaging by using audio and video, right? And I think that's the kind of user experience level we're aiming for. On a 10, 15 year horizon, for us, it's about like getting to the point where you can create a Hollywood film on a laptop. without the need for anything else in your imagination. It sounds kind of like a bit of as a crazy vision right now, maybe, but I actually don't think it's that crazy if you look at the history of kind of media production, right? So I have a hobby as a music producer, for example. I love electronic music. And when I open up my MacBook, I can synthesize and recreate any sound or instrument in existence, right? It's really fascinating, right? It's like you don't actually need real instruments to create a chart-topping hit. You can do more or less everything from your bedroom. That, of course, does not mean people are not using instruments anymore, but we have a fully digital creation process for creating music, for example, right? And that's been true for text since we invented computers. It's true for photos with Photoshop, for example. And now we're getting to the point where film and video and things like that is also going to be something you can do entirely digitally. Of course, it's not something that just appeared last year. Hollywood has been doing this for the last 30 years. The difference is that with AI, you can actually do something where it's not like 100 artists who spend 3 months on creating a 18-second scene in a Hollywood film. It's going to be something that's going to be much more accessible, right? So that's kind of like what we're building towards. So there's two kind of key parameters here. One is, of course, being able to make something that looks and feels entirely realistic. And the second parameter here is making something you don't need to have 5 years of experience being a programmer or visual effects artist to use, right?
Amazing.
So, Victor, walk me through what I would like to do with avatars today. Can I send an avatar in lieu of me going to a meeting? Is there a way that I can convince it to make some decisions on my behalf? What is that experience, and how do people react to that today? Are they doing training videos? They're sort of watching it, and they're seeing a talking head. Maybe there's some uncanny valley kind of experience there where they see it and they think it's almost human, but it's not quite. But how do I, as a user today, take advantage of an avatar? What can I do with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't yet have the real-time solution for you to replace yourself on Zoom, so that's probably not going to be in the immediate future. I do think we'll have we'll have kind of Zoom avatars at one point, which is just going to be. I think of this more as like the kind of ultimate version of Zoom has these kind of beauty filters. So if you're looking really tired, it can just like smooth out your skin, right? I think eventually you'll just have you can have kind of a full avatar, so you can sit in your pajamas and look like you're in a suit. If we look at kind of what people are doing today, I think. Very interestingly, right, and maybe a bit counterintuitive to a lot of people, I don't think any of our customers is using Synthesia videos and kind of pretending that it's real video, right? That's not how people are using it. People are using it to augment themselves in various different ways. And it's again about this taking something which could have been an email and just making it more interactive and fun to watch. And you can compress kind of how much information you can deliver in the shortest amount of time. So what we're seeing a lot of people doing is, if we take a real example, right? Let's say that you're a very, very large fast food chain. You have thousands, 100,000 of employees all over the world. And all these employees needs to be trained in, to use the example from before, like how to empty the oil in a deep fryer. What do you do if there's an angry customer? How do you return someone's meal, on the POS if something is wrong with the meal? What do you do with COVID-19 guidelines? There's a million things you have to learn, right? And of course, in an environment like this, there's a pretty high employee turnover, and it's really important that people get trained super quickly. So for years, right, there's always been a very kind of dedicated training and learning arm of this particular company. And they've done everything they can to make sure people learn as quickly as efficient as possible. And what they have done is that they have used video. So let's say you have to go through a 10-part course, for example, right? What they would usually do is they would have maybe the first part of the course would be a video with someone talking, hey, this is what we're going to experience, blah, 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 blah. And then there would be the rest of the course would be text, right? So please read these documents, go through these slides, and then maybe a quiz at the end. What they can do now is, as easy as they could create those slides or text parts of the course, they can now make video. And they can do that in the native language of the person who's watching the video. And they can do it without needing the video production department, which is a fantastic thing for them, right? It can now be the learning instructor themselves who can do it end to end, right? They don't need anyone else in their process, which makes it very fast. So that's a very real thing here. And the question as to how do people react to this, I think it's very interesting because this is obviously a technology and a space that you can go very, very deep on the philosophical questions around what does this mean? What does this say us about being human, and what is it going to look like in the future? And there's an exciting future, and there's of course also a partly kind of scary future with all this stuff, right? What we find, I'd say almost univocally with our customers, is a very utilitarian way of approaching these technologies, at least like in the workplace, which is, okay, we have an employee we need to train this person in these different things. And we asked the employee, do you want to read these 8 PDF files, or do you want to watch a video that's 3 minutes long? And maybe it's not as good as a real video, and everybody wants to watch the video, even if it's not perfect, right? And for the company, it's also very easy to see that when you watch a video, you remember way more of what you've learned than if you read something, especially the young generation, right? So there's this like academic research which says that you on average kind of remember, I think it's 80% of what you watch in a video versus 9% of what you read. And I'm sure that's different for different people and, all this type of stuff. But I think just kind of, for my own personal experience, that is very true. If I watch a YouTube video about something that might be 10 minutes long, or I read 100 pages about it, I think there's a good chance I'll remember more of the video because I have a visual memory of it as well. So I think that's kind of how most people approach it right now. Of course, there's going to be a question as to, let's say if you're like pretending that it's a real video, for example, right? Does that change how people perceive it? And I think that might very well be. I think that's one of the things where technologies like this, kind of appear, people experiment with them, and you figure out, okay, like this is bad form to do, for example. And then that's something you won't do in business. There's lots of unspoken rules in business that you don't do because it's bad form, right? Maybe this will be one of them. I don't know. I don't really think so. But that certainly is going to be interesting. And, you can go very deep on this. Like, for example, if you're thinking about like advertisements in the future created with this kind of technologies, and some people are like, oh, but it's going to be like fake people advertising for products, right? Surface level, yeah, that's right. But it's like, why is that so different from an actor who you're paying money to talk about your product, right? Like it's more or less the same thing. They're also reading from a script. They don't care about your product. They don't know anything about your product. They just got paid to show up Wednesday at 5 p.m. and spend an hour talking about how amazing your product is, right? So there's all these interesting dimensions you can kind of approach this from, and there's a logical and analytical way of looking at it. And there's emotional perspective. They both differ and interesting in their own respects, right? But I think that's a lot of the stuff we'll kind of learn over the next 5 years as this technology really permutates all of our comms.
Amazing. Well, and actually, you could probably argue that an avatar selling me something is more authentic than a human who's just been paid to sell me something. So I could definitely see that argument being made. One thing I really am wondering, as you've been talking about it, it's so clear that you're so passionate about what you're doing and the company that you're building and the future that you see because of it. But what has really driven you to build this? And what really fuels that passion as to why you feel like the world needs this?
I think there's a few different things. It probably all begins with the fact that I'm just like a massive sci-fi nerd, right? I think you probably have to be to build a company like
You're
this.
in good company.
You're on the right
podcast.
And that's something that started in my teens. But I think I've also always had this, I kind of love the creative arts of all different shapes and forms. Like I spent a lot of time on music and computer games when I was a kid, and art and all these things. And I'm very much a kid of the internet, right? So I grew up on the internet, and I grew up in Denmark, which is an awesome country, but it's a very small country, and it's in many ways pretty monocultural, right? There isn't like it's not like the US where you have every different type of subculture and these types of things. So I got very attached to the internet at an early age as a place where there was all this interesting information, all these different people, different ideas, different cultures, and the way we kind of communicate those is, of course, partly text, but it's also very much in visual, audio, media, and things like that. So I got very passionate about this idea of democratizing creativity. And I think we've seen this in the music industry very well, as I said before. But the fact that you can now legally download Ableton Live or a program like that, I'm not saying anyone should do that, but theoretically you could do that, right? And you could sit as a 16-year-old in your basement and you could create an amazing song and you could publish it on YouTube or SoundCloud. And all of this is more or less 100% free. And if you're just amazing at what you do, people will share it and you will, become something. So it's less about getting access to the means of production, living in LA, having a dad who works in the record recording business. And that idea is something I'm just very passionate about, right? I think kind of freeing creativity is something that's very kind of dear to me. And then I also just find it incredibly appealing intellectual challenge to bring a technology like this to market, right? It's just fun. And I meet a bunch of amazing people. And I think it's kind of hopefully being part of shaping at least a little bit of history. And that appeals to me on a personal level.
I personally find that fascinating because I'm an amateur musician. I'm sitting in my studio here and I'm mostly digital, except that I'm a drummer, so I've got a lot of acoustic instruments. But the idea of being able to democratize the access to art and the creation of art or the creation of any of that type of materials, I think that's resonating with me very significantly. I get that idea of being able to create something and put it out there. So that brings me to the discussion about the Hollywood film aspect, the ability to use the technology to do and tell stories and create, stories that you could put out there. Is this really about empowering the user to create, or is this a business driver? For you, it sounds to me like this is a creative passion. Do you foresee people using this more as a creative tool going forward than a business tool, or will it enable both?
That's a great question. And I think, I actually think the answer is both. I think, that Hollywood film is a great way to think of like the things we want to do in the future. I don't think it's necessarily the way it's going to pan out, as in like we'll all be sitting and creating Hollywood films in our bedrooms. I think if there's one thing that is consistent in the history of technology, right, is that the technology very much shapes the kind of format or the medium that comes out of it, right? So it'll probably not be people creating 1.5 hour blockbuster type of films. It'll probably be a very odd, weird combination of basically up-leveling YouTube content by a factor of 1,000, right? But the way I think about this is of course very much as a business, and I think it's also evident from like what we're doing today. That is of course very much tied to how can we build a big business? And I think the important part about that, apart from it being an awesome product and working with fantastic customers, is also kind of building a company that can sustain us innovating until we get to that point, right? If we just sat down today and was like, hey, let's just build Hollywood films on laptops, it's cool, but it's probably not that realistic. So I look a lot at big companies, that have several product lines. You take something like Adobe, for example. Photoshop was probably their first biggest hit. Since then, they've expanded to all different kinds of abstraction levels in terms of how advanced the applications are to use, to different use cases. And I think once we get to the point of building that Hollywood film on a laptop, which is still very far away, probably going to be a different product line than what we're doing today. But the key thing will be the same, right? Is that we want to move or enable media production with code and software instead of sensors like cameras and microphones. And that can take many different forms of expression. What we're doing right now requires less of the tech that you need to build a Hollywood film. And that makes it a great business for what it is today, right? But I think we can actually achieve both in the long term.
Fantastic. Well, one of the things I also wanted to ask you was, obviously in North America, there's going to be a new reality show. I'm sure you've probably heard of it, about Avatar singing competition called The Alter Ego from iHeartRadio. And then, of course, we've heard a lot about Mark Zuckerberg and how he wants to build the infinite office using avatars. I'm dying to know what you think about this. Do you think it's a flash in the pan? Have they got it right? Or do you think, are they just trying to, build off the hype? Or do you think this is really the first glimmer of things to come?
Actually, I take maybe a different perspective of this, which is that it's all just news headlines. The metaverse has been around since I spent probably 4 years of my life living inside World of Warcraft, and this is 15 years ago, right? And that is a metaverse. It has its own economy, which you could kind of think of as the crypto economy. It has avatars. It has people paying for things that are purely cosmetic to get, those fake internet points that make you popular on a World of Warcraft server. And I think, most people who kind of grew up on the internet have probably experienced the metaverse already, right? The idea is that you can actually build real relationships and have a meaningful life through digital devices. So I don't think that's necessarily new. I would say the same thing with avatar singing competitions, like Gorillaz has been around for a very long time. I think, they also in essence avatars. Anonymous artists have been around for a very long time. I think the change now is that it's becoming, again, easier to do these things. And it's becoming more immersive and more interesting for the general population. And there's a part of this which is driven by technology, of course. So, obviously things like VR and things like that is going to change the game kind of significantly. And technologies like ours makes avatars more accessible, something we're exposed to not just if you're on some fringe internet forum, but if you're, in your business life, for example. And that means that we eventually will kind of be more prone to interacting with them. So I actually think the biggest change here is actually less technological and more cultural. When I told my parents 15 years ago in World of Warcraft, I have real friends in World of Warcraft, they'd be like, no, you don't. That doesn't exist.
Not real.
I have real friends that exist purely behind a screen. Now we have companies like our company, right, where there's employees I've never met. They're just a Zoom window, at least for now, right? I look very much forward to meeting them in person and hanging out with them. But the idea that you can live a meaningful life and have meaningful interactions via software is something that the world is only really coming around to now. And COVID has been a big accelerator of that. So I think it's actually more of a cultural movement towards these things being something that is more acceptable and more normal and less weird. And I think that's how human history has panned out for the last hundreds and hundreds of years, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually and then very fast. So I'm excited about all these new things. And, obviously for someone like me, I think it's fantastic and it's a great business opportunity. And I genuinely think it'll bring a lot of awesome experience to our everyday life. But I don't see it as something that's fundamentally new, right? It's kind of going in waves up and down. And I think now we're in the wake of COVID. It's pretty obvious to everyone, I think, that actually you can have these meaningful experiences entirely by digital means.
That's fantastic. I mean, Carla and I have never met. We've worked together for almost 2 years. So there is a way to have fundamental relationships digitally at this point. So that's fantastic, Victor. This has been a great view into your mind, into the world that you live in and what you're bringing to the rest of us. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Carla, what do you have to say about that? That was quite the interview.
I say Infinite Enterprise approved. Stamp.
The big stamp comes
It
down.
is.
There we go.
Check,
Approved.
check. Infinitely distributed? Yes, definitely. Because what he unpacked and talked about, where we're using avatars to reach people all around the world so that they can train faster. There are companies that are already leveraging the technology they create. Are already distributed all around the world. So yes, absolutely. Is it customer centric? 100%, because it can be in their own language. It's, as he pointed out, it's easier for people to learn things through video than it is for them to read. So that is automatically customer centric at the heart of it. And then finally, at scale. This can be an individual experience, or it can be used for an entire enterprise, for an entire group of people. So, I mean, boom, 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 mic drop. Yes.
You have an opinion on this, I see.
A strong one.
Right. I was really fascinated by the idea of the sort of text to avatar translation mechanism. The idea that we can take all of that text and we can push it into an avatar that will take advantage of that knowledge to represent itself as, potentially as a Carla. We could have a Carla avatar.
I don't think.
Teaching us all.
Oh, dear. The power of what. Well, maybe sometimes our recordings would be going faster, wouldn't they? If you could just tell me what to say.
Well, I'm not directing this particular Hollywood film, which is also interesting. I love the idea that it democratizes creativity. It gives us the opportunity to tell stories in our own voice, in the voices of others through the use of avatars. I've always wanted to star in my own Hollywood film, so I think that would be an interesting attempt to tell a story.
Well, and now they can be in real life and not just in your head, Tim. You can be your own star of your own movie. I think the other really interesting thing that he had to say, Metaverse, already here, guys. Already here, which is also very infinite enterprise-like, right? We're already living in the infinite enterprise. We already have a Metaverse.
Yeah, the concept has been there through online gaming, through, Second Life, things like that. And now it's applicable to everyone, right? The idea that it's business applicable and it's also gaming, it's also these different experiences, but it's available to everyone, and it will become something that is available to the infinite enterprise, if you will.
I know. I mean, I certainly hope more investors are listening to this, because I am sure he is going to get more money from this.
That's right. Yes, I think inflection points will definitely get him some more investment.
Absolutely. So I really enjoyed our conversation with Victor. I think, to just sum up, Metaverse already here, definitely infinite enterprise approved. I mean, I think this is a big one. Get their avatars ready.
That's right. Yeah. I can't wait to see where we go next. I'll see you on the next episode. Join us for our next episode of Inflection Points, where we discuss how virtual reality is changing how we interact with the everyday world around us. But is it changing for the better? Episodes drop every other Wednesday. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.